The dress had taken Odette Hargrove 4 months to make. She had sewn it by lamplight in the back room of her workshop, after the last customer left, and the street outside went quiet, stitching until her fingers ached and the oil in the lamp burned low. Midnight blue silk with hand-embroidered constellations across the bodice, tiny copper beads that caught the light like scattered stars. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever created, and it was the first thing she had ever made entirely for herself. It was gone. The wardrobe stood open, the hook where the dress had hung now bare, and Odette stared at the empty space with the kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. The spring ball was in 4 hours. The whole town had been preparing for weeks, stringing lanterns across the bridge and laying fresh rushes in the grand assembly hall on the hill. And Odette had been counting down the days because for once, just once, she was going to walk through those doors wearing something she had made with her own hands and feel like she belonged there. She already knew who had taken it. "I sold it," Maud said from the kitchen doorway. She didn't look up from the bread she was slicing. Her voice was flat, practical. "Eleanor Price offered 12 crowns. We needed the money." 12 crowns. 4 months of work sold for 12 crowns without asking. "We didn't need the money." Odette's voice came out steady, which surprised her. "The shop made enough this month. I showed you the ledger." "The shop made enough for the shop." Maud set down the knife. Her flat, gray-green eyes finally lifted to meet Odette's, and there was something in them that Odette recognized. Not guilt, not regret. Satisfaction. The particular satisfaction of a woman who had decided long ago that her daughter's joy was an indulgence that needed correcting. "You spend too much time on vanity. A seamstress wearing her own finest work to a ball? People will talk. They'll say you're reaching above your station. It was mine. Nothing in this house is yours. You live under my roof. You eat my food. You work a trade I taught you." Maud picked up the knife again. "There will be other balls." Odette closed the wardrobe door. The click of the latch was very small and very final. She did not cry. She had stopped crying about things her mother did when she was 14, the year Maud had taken the embroidered shawl Odette's grandmother had left her and traded it for a bolt of common linen because sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. Instead, she went to her workshop, sat down at her cutting table, and pressed her palms flat against the wood and breathed. 4 hours. She had 4 hours and no dress and no money, and the certain knowledge that if she stayed home tonight, her mother would have won something that could never be given back. A knock at the workshop door. Not the front door of the house. The workshop door, the one that opened onto the narrow lane behind the building where deliveries came. Odette wiped her face, which was dry but felt like it should be wet, and opened it. A man stood in the lane. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that made the doorframe seem smaller than it was. He wore a dark coat, well made but deliberately plain, the kind of clothing that cost a great deal to look like it cost nothing. His hair was dark cedar brown, thick and slightly wavy, falling across his forehead in a way that suggested he pushed it back often and it never listened. His eyes were deep espresso brown, warm and steady, and they were looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. He was holding a dress. Not just any dress. A gown in deep emerald green, the silk so fine it moved like water in the late afternoon light. The bodice was structured, elegant, with delicate gold thread woven along the neckline, and the skirt fell in soft gathered folds. It was stunning. It was also, Odette noticed with the trained eye of someone who had been sewing since she could hold a needle, not quite finished. The hem was pinned rather than stitched. The sleeves needed pressing, almost perfect, made by someone very good who had run out of time. "Odette Hargrove?" His voice was low, not rough exactly, textured, like wood grain. "Yes." He held out the dress. "Get ready." She stared at him, then at the dress, then back at him. "I don't know who you are." "Evander." He said it simply, like a name was all the explanation required. "I had this commissioned for someone who decided she'd rather wear red. It needs finishing. The hem, the sleeves. He glanced down at the gown in his arms. I was told you're the best seamstress in Bridewell. I am the only seamstress in Bridewell. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The corner of his mouth shifted, and his eyes changed in a way that made her stomach do something unexpected. That isn't what I heard. Odette looked at the dress again. The silk was extraordinary. The construction was skilled, the work of someone who understood fabric the way a musician understood an instrument. You want me to finish this dress, she said slowly. I want you to finish it and wear it. He leaned against the doorframe. The movement was casual, but his eyes were not. Those espresso brown eyes watched her with something that felt heavier than a stranger's interest. The ball tonight. You were planning to go. How do you know that? Because you're the woman who made the midnight blue gown with the constellation embroidery that Eleanor Price is currently showing off to half the merchant quarter as if she made it herself. The words landed like a stone in still water. He knew about her dress. He knew it had been sold. He knew Eleanor Price had it, and he had come here, to her workshop door, with a replacement. Who are you? Someone who thinks a woman who can create something that beautiful shouldn't have to watch someone else wear it. He straightened from the doorframe. Finish the dress. Wear it to the ball. If you want to return it afterward, you can. He set the gown across her cutting table before she could refuse. His hand brushed hers as he laid the fabric down, and something happened. The lamplight in the workshop seemed to shift, deepen. The amber glow that had been ordinary a moment ago turned rich and warm, and the green of the silk became so vivid it almost hummed, and the wood grain of her cutting table looked like something an artist had painted rather than something she stared at every day. The whole room seemed to sharpen into focus, as if she had been seeing the world through fog and someone had wiped the glass clean. Odette blinked. The sensation faded, not completely, but enough to breathe. 2 hours, Evander said from the doorway. I'll come back for you. He was gone before she could argue. Odette stood in her workshop with a stranger's dress draped across her table and her hands full of silk that felt like it was alive under her fingers, and she made a decision. She would finish the dress. She would wear it. And she would walk into that ball with her head up and her shoulders back. And if her mother had something to say about it, Maud Hargrove could say it to her face. She worked fast. The hem took 40 minutes, small precise stitches that would hold through dancing. The sleeves needed reshaping at the wrist, a tighter fit that would show off the gold threadwork. She pressed the bodice with a warm iron and adjusted the waist, taking it in a 1/4 inch on each side, because whoever this dress had been made for was slightly broader through the ribs than Odette. The work steadied her. It always did. Her hands knew what to do even when the rest of her was shaking, and by the time she slipped the finished gown over her head and looked at herself in the workshop mirror, something in her chest that had been clenched since she opened the empty wardrobe finally loosened. The dress fit like it had been made for her. The emerald silk turned her cinnamon brown hair warm and rich, and the gold at the neckline caught the lamplight, and she looked like someone she almost recognized. Someone who belonged at a ball. Someone who deserved to be there. Another knock. She opened the door. Evander had changed. He wore a dark formal coat now, well-tailored, with a high collar and buttons that gleamed dull gold. His hair had been pushed back, but was already falling forward again, and his jaw was clean, and those deep brown eyes moved over her with an expression that made every nerve in her body pay attention. You finished it, he said. I'm a seamstress. It's what I do. You didn't just finish it. He was looking at the wrists, where she had reshaped the sleeves, the waist, where she had taken it in, the hem, where her stitching was so clean it was invisible. You made it better. Something warm spread through her chest, not from the compliment, from the way he said it, like he meant it, like he had looked carefully enough to notice the details and cared enough to name them. They walked to the ball together. The assembly hall sat on the crest of the hill above town, and the path wound upward through streets hung with paper lanterns and garlands of early spring blossoms. The river caught the last of the sunset and threw it back in broken gold. Odette could hear music already, drifting down from the open doors of the hall, and with every step closer to this man, she couldn't name the colors around her intensified. The lanterns burned brighter, the blossoms looked more vivid. The sunset was richer and deeper and more saturated than any sunset she had ever seen, and she kept glancing at Evander to see if he noticed, but his eyes were on her. "The woman who was supposed to wear this dress," Odette said as they climbed. "Who was she?" "A lord's daughter from the Eastern Territory. She changed her mind about the color 3 days before the event." A pause. "She changes her mind about most things? And you just happened to know a seamstress who had lost her own dress today?" "I heard about it this afternoon. Word travels in small towns." "That's not an answer." He looked at her. The lamplight caught his face, and something in those espresso brown eyes was careful and deliberate and patient, like he was holding something back and choosing exactly when to release it. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." They reached the hall. The doors were wide open, golden light spilling onto the stone steps, music and voices pouring into the evening air. Odette could see the crowd inside, merchants and officials in their best coats, young couples already dancing. She had attended every year since she was 16, always in the background, always in a dress she had made for someone else and altered to fit. Not tonight. She walked in on Evander's arm and the room noticed. Not because of him, though he drew attention simply by existing. The height, the shoulders, the quiet authority that clung to him like weather. They noticed because of the dress, because of the way it moved, because of the gold threadwork catching every candle in the room and throwing it back, and because Odette Hargrove, the seamstress who sewed everyone else's finery, was wearing something that outshone every gown in the hall. Eleanor Price was standing near the punch table. She was wearing the midnight blue dress, Odette's dress, the constellation embroidery that had taken 3 weeks of evening work, and she was staring at Odette with an expression that landed somewhere between shock and fury. Odette looked at the dress on Eleanor's body and felt something she didn't expect. Not jealousy, not grief. Release. That dress belonged to a version of her that sat alone in a workshop stitching by lamplight and hoping someone would see her. The woman standing here now, in emerald silk she had finished with her own hands, had walked through the front door. Evander led her to the center of the room. The musicians were playing something slow and sweeping, strings and a low drum, and he turned to face her and offered his hand and said, "Dance with me." "I should warn you," Odette said, "I'm not very good." "I don't care." His hand closed around hers. The world sharpened again, a sudden vivid rush that took her breath. The candlelight turned golden and thick. The music gained a richness she could feel in her chest, and the green of her dress blazed like a living thing. She could see every thread in his coat, every fleck of warmth in those dark brown eyes, and the room around them softened to a blur while the space between their bodies became the most detailed, most alive place in the world. They danced. He was steady and sure, and he held her like she was something valuable, one hand at her waist and the other wrapped around her fingers, and he smelled like cedar and old paper and the clean, sharp air after rain. She stepped on his foot twice, and he didn't flinch. She laughed the second time, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and something in his expression cracked open. "There it is," he murmured. "There's what?" "You, without the armor." The song ended. Another began. They didn't stop. Halfway through the third dance, a voice cut through the music. "Odette." Maud Hargrove stood at the edge of the dance floor. She was not dressed for a ball. She wore her house clothes, her graying hair pulled back, her mouth set in the thin line that meant she had come to collect something that belonged to her. Her flat gray-green eyes moved from Odette to the dress to Evander and back to Odette, and something cold and precise settled into her expression. "Where did you get that dress?" Odette stopped dancing. Evander's hand tightened on her waist, a small, instinctive pressure that said, "I'm here. But he didn't step forward. He didn't speak. He let her have this. Someone gave it to me, Odette said. Someone gave you a dress worth 30 crowns. Maud's voice carried. People were turning, listening. The music continued, but the dancers near them had slowed, watching the seamstress and the woman who looked like her mother having a conversation that felt like a fuse being lit. Take it off. Come home. You're embarrassing yourself. No. The word was quiet, but it filled the space between them. I said no, mother. Odette's hands were shaking. She pressed them against the silk of her skirt and felt the fabric warm under her palms, grounding her. You sold my dress, the one I made. 4 months of my work. Sold for 12 crowns without asking me, and you did it because you wanted to. Not because we needed the money. Because you couldn't stand the idea of me wearing something beautiful to a place where people might look at me and see something other than your daughter, the seamstress. The room had gone quiet. Even the musicians had softened, the melody fading to a whisper. You have done this my whole life. Odette's voice didn't break. It strengthened. Grandmother's shawl, the lace collar I made when I was 15, the commission portfolio I put together to apply for the guild, the one that disappeared from my desk and you said the cat knocked it into the fire. Every single time I made something that might take me somewhere, you took it away. And I let you. Because I thought that's what daughters were supposed to do. Maud's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted to the watching crowd and back. You are making a scene. Good. Odette stepped forward. I am making a scene, in a dress I finished with my own hands, at a ball I walked into on my own feet, and I am telling you, in front of every person in this room, that you do not get to take things from me anymore. Not my work, not my joy, not my life. Silence. Absolute. Ringing silence. Maud's face went white, then red, then settled into something rigid and closed. She looked at Odette the way you look at a door that is locked from the inside. Then she turned and walked out. Odette's knees buckled. Not dramatically, just a softening, a give, the way a held breath finally releases. Evander was there, his hand at her back, warm and steady, guiding her through the crowd and through a side door and out onto the balcony that overlooked the river and the town below, all of it strung with lanterns, all of it bright. The night air hit her skin and she gasped. Her hands were still shaking. She gripped the stone railing and breathed, in and out, and the world pulsed with color, the lanterns impossibly vivid. The river like liquid amber, the stars overhead sharper than she had ever seen them. You were magnificent, Evander said quietly. I was terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He stood beside her, close but not crowding, and his voice was low and certain. Odette, there's something I need to tell you. She looked at him. The lamplight from inside caught half his face, turning the cedar of his hair to bronze and throwing his features into relief. The strong jaw, the careful mouth, the eyes that had been watching her all night with something deeper than interest. My name is Evander Lockwood, he said. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Reach. I came to Bridewell to attend the spring ball without the politics, without the ceremony, just to see a town I'd heard was beautiful. He paused. And then I heard about a seamstress whose mother sold the dress she'd made for herself, and I went to her workshop with a gown that needed finishing because I wanted to see what kind of woman makes constellation embroidery by lamplight. The Alpha King. The man who ruled every territory from the Reach to the southern coast. The man whose name was spoken in council halls and whispered in market squares, and whose face she had never seen because he was young and new to the throne and had never toured the river towns. You brought me a dress, she said faintly. I brought you a reason to come tonight. He turned to face her fully, and the air between them shimmered. Not metaphorically. The colors deepened, the edges sharpened, and Odette realized with a rush that stopped her heart that the vivid, saturated world she had been seeing all evening was not her imagination. It was him. It was what happened when he was near. I didn't know why until I touched your hand in the workshop and the whole world changed color. The bond, she whispered. Yes. You're telling me you're the Alpha King and my fated mate, and you led with the dress. Something that was definitely a smile now. Small and real and slightly helpless. I thought the dress was more immediately useful than the title. Odette laughed. It came out half broken, half bright. And she pressed her hand to her mouth, and the laugh turned into something that trembled, and Evander stepped closer and said her name. Just her name. Odette. Said it like it mattered. Said it like it was the only word he needed. And she looked up at him with the river shining below, and the lanterns burning vivid and impossibly bright, and she said, "You're going to have to explain a lot more than this." "I know. I'm a seamstress from a river town." "I know. My mother just humiliated me in front of everyone I've ever met." "No." His hand came up. His fingers touched her jaw, light as breath, tilting her face up toward his. The contact sent a wave of color through her vision, the stars brightening, the lantern light turning to gold, and his face was so close she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes and the way his pupils had widened until there was barely any brown left. "You stood up for yourself in front of everyone you've ever met. There's a difference." He kissed her. Slow, deliberate. His mouth on hers with a careful pressure that said, "I've been wanting to do this all night." His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, fingers threading into her hair, and the world exploded into color. Not just brighter, richer, deeper. Every shade she had ever known became its fullest self, and the sensation poured through her like light through glass, warm and overwhelming and impossibly right. She grabbed the front of his coat and pulled him closer and kissed him back, and the bond between them sang, a silent chord that resonated in her bones. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard, and the river below was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and Evander Lockwood was looking at her like she was the only real thing in the world. "Come with me," he said. "Not tonight. Not because of a bond or a title or a dress. Come with me when you're ready. Bring your workshop. Bring your needles and your silk and your constellation patterns. Come because you want to." "Where?" "The capital, the Northern Keep." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The royal household has a textile workshop that hasn't had a master in 6 years. It has 8 looms and a cutting room with windows that face the sea and more natural light than any workshop in the territory. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a life. The job is just how I'm getting you to consider it." 2 months later, Odette Hargrove stood in a workshop with windows that faced the sea. The morning light poured in, clear and clean, and the cutting table was 3 times the size of her old one, and the silk bolts on the shelves came from 6 different territories, and the dress she was working on was for herself. A deep gold gown with embroidered wildflowers along the hem, each one stitched by hand in the colors of the river town she had come from. Evander found her there most mornings. He would lean in the doorway the same way he had leaned in her workshop door that first evening, watching her work with those espresso brown eyes that still made the world go vivid every time they found hers. The bond had not faded. If anything, it had deepened. Colors were richer now. Textures more alive. She could feel him at the edges of her awareness like a warm current, and when he was away at council or riding the territory borders, the world went slightly flat and gray, and she would look at her fabrics and think almost, not quite. And then he would walk through the door and the silk would blaze to life under her hands. "The guildmaster from Bridewell sent a letter," Evander said from the doorway. He had a cup of tea in each hand, and his hair was falling into his face, and he was wearing a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked nothing like a king and everything like the man who had shown up at her door with a dress and 2 words, "Get ready." "What does it say?" Odette set down her needle. "They want to commission you, formally, the whole textile guild. Seems the seamstress who walked into the spring ball in emerald silk and told her mother off in front of the entire town has become something of a legend." He handed her the tea. Their fingers brushed. Color bloomed, a warm rush of gold through the morning light. Also, your mother has moved to her sister's house in the eastern quarter. The workshop on Mill Lane is empty. I don't need it anymore. No. He looked around her new workshop, the sea light, the silk, the 8 looms and the windows and the woman at the center of all of it, stitching wildflowers into gold. You don't. Odette picked up her needle. The thread was copper, almost the same shade as the beads on the midnight blue dress she had made in another life, in a dark workshop by dying lamplight, hoping someone would see her. She didn't need anyone to see her now. She saw herself. That was the difference. Evander sat on the workbench beside her, close enough that the world hummed with color, and drank his tea, and watched her work, and said nothing, because sometimes the most powerful thing a king can do is sit quietly beside the woman he loves while she creates something beautiful. Outside, the sea turned gold in the morning light. Inside, Odette stitched, and the thread caught the sun, and the colors were exactly, perfectly, impossibly right.